It was an old, abandoned house, left untouched for decades. Dust covered every corner, and cobwebs clung to the forgotten walls. Silence filled the air, broken only by the occasional creak of the aging wood beneath her feet. Her heart raced with a strange sense of unease, but she pressed forward. Among the forgotten relics was a portrait. It hung crookedly on the wall, surrounded by layers of dust. The woman in the painting had hollow eyes that seemed to glow faintly in the dim light. Her gaze was unnervingly lifelike, almost as if she were staring into your soul. The woman stood before the painting, her fingers hovering just inches away from the cracked frame. Something about the painting made her feel uneasy, but curiosity overcame her, and she reached out to touch the frame. As her fingers made contact, a chill filled the room, her breath visible in the air as the temperature seemed to drop. Then it happened. The eyes in the painting, they moved. At first, it was barely noticeable, just a flicker of motion. But as she stepped back, it became clear. The eyes were following her every movement. Her blood ran cold as she realized that the woman in the painting was not just a lifeless image. She was alive. The woman took a few steps back, her heart pounding. The air felt thick, suffocating, as if the house itself was holding its breath. She looked around, but nothing seemed out of place except for the growing sense of dread that filled the room. Suddenly, the whispering began. Soft at first, like a distant murmur, but gradually growing louder. It echoed through the room, barely audible, yet chilling. You shouldn't have touched it. She froze, her body stiffening as the whisper reverberated in her mind. The walls seemed to close in on her. She turned toward the narrow hallway, but before she could take another step, the portrait appeared in her peripheral vision, now much closer. Its eyes still followed her, unwavering, filled with something dark, something hungry. She spun around, her breath quickening. The whispering grew louder, clearer. You shouldn't have touched it. She rushed toward the hallway, but the shadows that lined the walls began to stretch unnaturally, reaching toward her like fingers in the dark. At the end of the hallway, she saw the portrait again. It wasn't supposed to be there. It had moved. The woman's eyes glowed with an unnatural light, watching her as if waiting for something. She could feel the weight of its gaze, pressing against her like an invisible force. The woman's chest tightened as the shadows grew darker, the air growing colder with every step she took. She turned to make her way to the living room, but when she entered, the painting was hanging there once more, closer now, the eyes wide open and locked onto her. She couldn't move. She was frozen in place. Behind her, she saw it. Just a flicker at first, a dark shape in the reflection of the painting. A shadowy figure stood in the corner of the room, barely visible, but its presence was undeniable. She couldn't breathe. She couldn't scream. The figure in the reflection moved closer, but when she turned around, there was nothing there. Her body trembled, her hand reaching for the door, desperate to escape. But the door wouldn't budge. The whispers intensified, now mixed with low, mocking laughter. You shouldn't have touched it. Panic seized her. The room felt smaller, suffocating. She pulled at the door again, but it refused to open. The figure's presence grew stronger. The shadows in the corners of the room seemed to stretch toward her, wrapping around her like a dark shroud. Suddenly, the door slammed open with a violent force. But there was no escape. Instead of a way out, there was only darkness. The room seemed to disappear, swallowed by the void. The portrait, now hovering in the blackness, stared at her unblinking. Frozen in terror, she stood at the threshold, unable to move, her body paralyzed by fear. The darkness around her pressed in, suffocating her, while the eyes of the woman in the portrait gleamed with malevolent delight. Then, a sudden rush of shadows swarmed the room, consuming everything in their path. The woman screamed, but the sound was lost, swallowed by the overwhelming silence. She tried to run, but the darkness closed in, pulling her toward the painting. The last thing she saw was the painting's eyes, glowing, watching, waiting. And then, she was gone. The room fell silent, as it always had. The portrait remained on the wall, its eyes still glowing faintly in the dark, waiting for the next soul foolish enough to step inside.